So we have seen cases of sex trafficking as well as labor trafficking. And sex trafficking here in North Central PA, it looks more like individuals being forced to commit sexual acts in order to fulfill obligations, whether that's to fulfill a need for drugs or alcohol, if someone has a substance abuse disorder, or family members or someone who has a little bit more privilege or power over someone, forcing them to commit sex acts for the benefit of themselves.
For almost all of the trafficking that we see, not all, but almost all of it, it's almost always done under the guise of a relationship happening. And so for a lot of survivors, not only is there this sexual assault, but there's this domestic violence because there was this coercion and control of what they were doing.
We see parents, aunts, foster parents who are trafficking their children, their relatives who are children, but we also see children who are runaways. We've had cases of runaways from the New York foster care system, and they end up here getting picked up by a trafficker, or they're brought here by the trafficker, and they're busted in a prostitution sting, let's say. And again, I don't like that word. Let's call it a trafficking sting at a local hotel. Cumberland County had one, and youth were picked up there.
Often it's in exchange for drugs. I've had many cases where it turns out that the individual got some methamphetamine, for example, in exchange for allowing the child under that other adult's control to be exploited by that individual. So drugs are often exchanged. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's drugs. Often in the smaller towns and the family-based abuse cases, it's drugs, as opposed to the traffickers of, say, a teenage girl who are taking her to different locations where they're usually strictly interested in cash.
Trafficking in kids is so insidious because it's not the way we view trafficking in the media, right? Like in the media, you're taken into it's Taken, the movie, right? Like I'm gonna get picked up off the street and flown across to another country and never seen again. And that's not what it is. They go home to sleep every night usually. They come back to our programs and they're there in a bed to sleep in, but they're gone throughout the day, and they leave for a couple hours, and so it's very different than I think what we normally kind of have an idea of. Social media is where it's at. Like, that's where it's happening. And it's so insidious because it's not just in one app, it's all over, right? And now there's like this culture of like an influencer. So you can't really be private, and you don't want them to not know where your location is because you're an influencer. So you want to get to know people on social media, and you want to be able to talk to people you don't know. And there's not a lot of education anymore around like what are the dangers of that. And so it's really, really hard to combat that. And so we have to do a lot of education around, you know, where can we instill safety in this?
As we all know, kids are on social media a large part of their day. So when I talk to them, we talk about the different apps, you know, Snapchat, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, all of those, and how they all have the messaging and that you can message anybody. We also talk about, do they know who they're talking to? You know, it's all about how many likes you can get, how many friends, how many followers, and talking to them about the dangers of being friends and talking to people that you don't know. And then also about what they're posting. If they're posting complaining about their life, that is a vulnerability that a trafficker can look at and be like, oh, well, I can help them.
It has given traffickers a tool. Kids oftentimes share a lot of things that they shouldn't. They don't have their privacy settings done correctly. And so all it takes is a trafficker to find that person, look at their posts, look at their pictures. Are there family pictures? Or is this a child who may be from an unstable environment, who's looking for a friend, a boyfriend, a big sister, and they'll use that. And absolutely, social media is a recruiting tool. It's also a recruiting tool for adults, right? You don't know who's on the other end of that. And traffickers are good. They're good at manipulation. They know how to do that.
Kids can be trafficked in all different types of ways. So what we're looking for in red flags is people being vulnerable already, kids being vulnerable, and then looking at the ways in which trafficking kind of presents itself. So again, do they need something for survival? Are they looking for just a place to sleep, a place to eat? Or is it more that they are looking for love in the wrong places, right? Like, I don't have family, I don't have permanency resources, I don't have stability, and now this person is can read that on my face, right? Like, they know who's vulnerable, so they start to groom them, is kind of what we talk about.
A child who's withdrawn, they're either withdrawn and they seem depressive, they don't interact with their peers very much, they don't tend to interact with peers anywhere, whether it's at school or at home. They're just always in the home, or they're always with an adult as opposed to playing with other children, which would be more natural. You'll see sometimes obvious signs of depression, anxiety. In some cases, however, the child who's victimized, particularly from a very young age, they often become what we call sexually activated, which means all of a sudden they have a premature interest in sex. So they may be actually even masturbating at school. They might be attempting to touch other people inappropriately. Those are definitely major indicators that that person was sexually molested.
With some of the cases that we've seen, individuals are talked to for weeks, even months, before any type of trafficking takes place. So the grooming process is buying them gifts, talking to them, becoming a friend to them, maybe offering them something that they're not getting somewhere else, and then using that relationship to the trafficker's advantage to then force them into acts that they don't want to commit.
I always knew that we just had a special thing. I hurt you deep, but still we get a second chance. I know you feel just like I do. Yeah, yeah. I didn't see that we've been soulmates, didn't understand. But you've been present in my mind, never ending dance. I know you feel just like I do. Yeah, 'cause when it's all said and done, everyone deserves someone. Hold me tight, 'cause sun can be weak sometimes. Yeah. When the sun don't shine, when success makes blind, would you still be by my side? 'Cause all this love can drain. You treated me like Superman. Would you hold me down this time?
The problem with childhood sexual abuse and trafficking is that it affects every demographic. It doesn't matter income, race, gender, this affects everyone. And in my situation, I was being trafficked by white, appearing upper middle class Christians. And personally, I believe it played a part in the fact that they were able to get away with it because they looked fine. I'm Lina. I grew up in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and I am a social work student at the University of Pittsburgh, and I volunteer here at the Brookline Teen Outreach. As a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and trafficking, I had to come into adulthood with some deficits and with some understandings of the world that were beyond my years.
He was taking pictures, which at the first point I didn't know he was, because I went over to his buddy's house, nobody was there, and I went in to get a shower. And I didn't know he was standing right there, but he started taking pictures.
Did he tell you what he's gonna do with the pictures?
No. Never told me. He just took them, and then he took me up to, it was in Pennsylvania. It was a couple hours away to meet this guy. The guy came back with us, and we was doing stuff, and he was coming in and taking more pictures.
What kind of stuff were you doing?
Having sex.
Seeing for the most part, the majority of cases that I've worked with are, children within a family unit where either a family member and or a family member's paramour, significant other, is involved in abusing the children. So in a lot of those cases, there's one perpetrator who's chronically perpetrating against a child or the children in the home. However, I would say in the last 10 years, about half of those cases, I've discovered that the parent or other adult that originally was perpetrating against the children, now they've brought in other adults, usually men, other men, to have that child available sexually to them. So then we've seen it go from, one person perpetrating in a household to somebody actually trafficking either their own children, their stepchildren, their girlfriend's children, to other adult males typically. And that's usually 2 or 3 other adult males that might be involved with that. Then we have the more rare cases that I see anyway, where we'll have somebody who's actually being pimped out by their parent to strangers, even on the internet, where they'll even advertise on some of these crazy websites that they have children available. And in the case of a local girl from Williamsport, for example, her mother was having men fly in to Williamsport from other parts of the country, and they get to spend the night with their daughter.
Growing up in Williamsport was confusing and at times isolating. I grew up mostly on South Side, and I think there's a lot that people don't talk about, and I think it's very difficult for us to look at some of the issues going on in the Williamsport area within our youth populations. It's difficult for me to talk about it. But as a child in South Williamsport, my mother did exploit me and others sexually. And it was in an environment where that kind of behavior was normalized to the extent that when we asked for help, we were told it was not available.
When did you meet?
I met him in, I think in 2006, 2007, beginning of 2007.
Do you know how old you were then?
Like I said, 12, 13, maybe even 14. I don't really remember.
What was your relationship like with him?
Friends, I thought.
How old was he?
30 at the time.
Did he ever bring anybody from, like, just within the trailer court around to have sex with you?
No.
Did he ever have sex with you?
No.
So he was just kind of with other guys, and then he was taking pictures?
Yes.
And then at one point, did you go up to New York?
West Virginia.
Okay, West Virginia.
To meet this guy. We came back, he came back with us, and a couple days later he had to leave.
So the only point of you going and then coming back was so he could have sex?
The guy that I met, yes.
And was that another guy who you met online?
Mm-hmm.
There are different types of pedophiles, and one way to look at some of these groups are there's people who seek victims of opportunity, and then there's people who construct a lifestyle that gives them power and privilege over others. And in some social settings, people with power and privilege, even when a child reports against them, they don't get the support that they need. So when I turned 18, I did report. I got into therapy and I got the support I needed to report my mom and her associates, but nothing really came of the investigation. I didn't have any other witnesses, and I also was disowned from that side of my family. It's just a mess. And that's where I was standing, was in this mess of, well, I thought I was doing the right thing reporting it because I want to protect children and I want justice, but now I have lost my family, or at least a branch of my family.
Animal when I jump your bones. If I smell your scent, I could lose control. Don't let me hurt ya. I've tried to tame her. I go wild over you. I go wild over you. I go wild over you. And I've heard you talking to the moon. Papa always said both sides are gonna hate, and since my daddy's dead, he was right, I must say. Not too many have for love, rather looking down and judge. Intention showing up, that's so fake, I must say. I felt lost, I've lost all trust, but this time I'm too close. I felt so lost, but this time I'm too
People see human trafficking as something that doesn't happen, or it's in other countries, or it is, stealing people and taking them places, but it does happen in our own backyard.
We see cases, but a lot of times they don't make it to the media. They don't make it to court because they're very hard cases to crack and really hard cases for law enforcement to, sink their teeth in and get some buy-in from the community, as well as getting survivors to want to speak up.
Some have been threatened with their life. Some have been threatened with they're going to harm someone in their family if they tell. So they have all these legitimate anxieties about being honest with me that they were in fact sexually abused. So I have to let them know what the criminal justice system will likely do. But again, it's difficult for professionals in my position because sometimes we simply can't guarantee them many of these safeguards. We have to have the cooperation of the local child protective services. We have to have the cooperation of law enforcement. And of course, we have to have the cooperation of the judicial system, the prosecution, district attorneys, to give those types of reassurances. Now, depending on who was the perpetrator, we may be able to give them guarantees because we know that they're going to be removed from a parent, for example, or a parent's home where a boyfriend is the perpetrator, perhaps, and that's often the case.
When I'm talking to staff about what we're going to do with how we're going to work with these kids, it's about walking alongside them and planting seeds around this is the path we want you to go on. We want you to be safe. This is the ways in which we can kind of provide this for you. But we let them kind of walk down that path and we walk alongside them. It's a really hard challenge though, and it's all about relationships. If we don't have a relationship and we haven't built trust and rapport and we aren't showing up with a genuine want to be there, we're not getting anywhere with these kids. So it's all about the relationships we build. And once you have that trust and once you have that connection, how can you kind of educate the kids on what is the reality of this? And is this the way you want life to kind of play out, or do we want to go a different way? And also knowing that sometimes we don't know best, right? The kids know themselves best in their situations, and sometimes it's not safe to leave in those moments, or sometimes we aren't going to be able to offer something better because what we have is also temporary, and they have to be able to sustain themselves after us. So that's why we walk alongside and plant seeds and provide what we can.
We have to look at the person in context with the greater situation, and we have to give them the opportunity to use their own agency to leave the situation. So we see this a lot in dynamics of narcissistic abuse, and you're getting messages every day, and those messages are shaping your thinking. So if I have someone in the corner every day telling me that what's happening is okay, normal, expected, your fault, your fate, at a certain point, your brain starts to buy in. And that is why environments of safety that are accessible, that are filled with trusted community partners are so important. Because until that woman or child or person, it can happen to anyone, man, woman, child, but that person that's hearing those messages, who's starting to buy in to this acceptance of the situation just through repetition and programming, they have to get that rope, you know, that we talked about earlier. And that rope is human connection.
Each provider that's part of the Path 15 collaborative, they take steps to educate their local communities on what is happening, what trafficking is, what are the warning signs, what can the community do to combat trafficking, and how can they prevent it. So in addition to that, it provides the services, whether that's resheltering or rehousing, or providing that wraparound support for a victim as they travel that road to becoming a survivor of trafficking.
So since Path 15 was formed, we've reached nearly 400 victims. Those aren't all cases that get prosecuted. One of the benefits of working with victim services is we're not forcing that victim to cooperate with law enforcement. We certainly want to encourage it, but we let them find their way through what's happened to them until the time comes when they decide they're ready to work with law enforcement and your prosecutor's office. The process of recovery is a long one, and the complex trauma that these victims have is something that is very hard to describe. Think of it in these terms. A domestic violence victim is often coming to us seeking safety from one perpetrator. But a human trafficking victim is seeking safety from multiple rapes every single day, as many as 40 to 60 is the statistics, and it's very common to what we're hearing from the victims. And so put that on top of their vulnerabilities, domestic violence in their past, really an unstable home environment as a child, or child abuse and neglect, some kind of trauma, mental health, substance abuse. Put that on top of this human trafficking trauma, it's very challenging, and it takes a long time. Again, everybody's different, but it takes a long time. We work with victims each day. It's, what do you need today to be safe? Right? We're not thinking 5 years ahead to get you a house and an apartment and a job. It's, what do you need today to be safe?
Make sure that person knows that you're a safe place no matter what. I think for a lot of people, we want to do the tough love thing, and I can't be a part of this anymore, but that's really the exact wrong thing to do to someone who is in one of these relationships where there's the elements of interpersonal violence, because that goes right back to the isolation. And so the more that you're isolated, the more that the trafficker was right when he said that he was the only person that was going to love me and that nobody would believe me.
When you look back on it now, can you rationalize a little bit, like what was going through your head or the whole situation?
Honestly, to be honest, nothing was going through my head. I'm like, yay, I'm out, and mom's sitting at home, don't care. I'm like, I'm out doing my thing. And I just hope now, since I realized everything that I've been through, my kids don't end up the way I did. I hope they come to me and talk to me what's going on instead of doing the stuff that I did.
Because you didn't have anybody to talk to.
No.
What did your mom say after she found out?
She found the pictures when I was in placement. She didn't really talk to me much about it. I did a lot of treatment in placement. And that's how I kind of overcame what I've went through. I mean, I went down and was talking to the feds and everything like that. And they got involved and they arrested him November, I think, of 2007.
We're not alone. That there is love and connection available in the community, and that if something is hurting, that that we should find safe spaces to talk about it. I know that this is a very difficult thing to talk about, and I know that this piece is going to trigger a lot of people and their pain. And I just want to say that that is a normal response, and that there is help available.
You're like a ghost, you're haunting me, just like a ghost, you're haunting me down. Hey, hey. Hey. You're like a ghost, you're haunting me, just like a ghost, you're haunting me down.